Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. From Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and the palatial FYC studios, you are listening to For Your Consideration,
a podcast featuring roundtable discussions reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm your host, Dustin Friesnam.
And I'm your host, Mike Josic, and we'd like to give a hearty welcome back to any of our regular listeners, and also a welcome to first-time listeners. Glad you stopped by, gave us a download, decided to check us out. But for those listeners, just a bit of a warning, spoilers ahead. We do talk about the films in toto. Hard to talk about movies and determining whether we think they're masterpieces or museum pieces without actually dealing with genuine plot points.
To be fair, we haven't really tried, have we?
Haven't tried what?
Doing spoiler-free, a spoiler-free episode of anything.
No, I don't think so. Actually, no. I think we've done some All Things Considered for stuff that was currently in theaters, but I feel
like we did spoilers too.
It's very possible. It's kind of our thing. So
we're here to spoil your day.
Literally and figuratively. Judging by some of the comments that we get on YouTube. Anyways.
Well, I'm doing my part. I don't know about you.
For anybody who does listen to the show and listen to our last episode, you will know that today we are going to be covering an American film, something that we haven't done in a few months, I believe. It is the 1986 classic John Hughes comedy, Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
AKA Cameron's Sick Day.
You know, I almost think that would have been a worse title, but technically a better title.
Technically a bit more accurate, as I feel he's more the central character.
He is, and I think most people, including the filmmakers, would agree that Cameron is kind of the central character of the film.
It's kind of interesting because he's sort of a side character who's also the central character. It doesn't even give us sort of a what happens to him at the end of it, but that's getting a little too into the details already, so we should roll credits and all that stuff first.
We will definitely roll credits right now so that we can get to that. Ferris Bueller's Day Off was directed by John Hughes, written by John Hughes, produced by John Hughes and Tom Jacobson. It starred Matthew Broderick, Mia Sara, and Alan Ruck. Cinematography was by Tak Fujimoto. Edited by Paul Hirsch. Music by Ira Newborn. Distributed by Paramount Pictures and released on June 11th, 1986 in the United States. The film was generally well received by critics. Very popular film at the box office, so very well received by fans. I don't believe it won any real significant awards, although Broderick was nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Actor for his performance as Ferris Bueller. It's a endlessly influential and popular film, very much in the cultural zeitgeist. Its influence can be seen in countless television shows and films since then.
And it's made its way to 588th spot on the critics poll for greatest films of all time on Sight and Sound.
How many votes for 588th?
2 critics.
Oh, interesting. I kind of expect this to be one of those like one critic or director films that sort of sneaks in just because one person kind of liked it.
You really can never tell.
You never. And as we've said many, many times on the show previous to this, I'm super curious and excited to see what the 2022 list is going to look like. And if, you know, some of these films that stick around with a different position or have more or less people, you know, voting for them or what's the kind of deal? I don't know. That's kind of the weeds of this that I'm sort of excited for this fall. I think it's October or November.
It's in November, and I'm hoping that maybe if I reach out again, they'll actually respond with whether or not we can get on there.
Well, I mean, the list is probably already compiled, so if we
get
on,
fun.
If we get on, it's going to be for like the 2032 list. So just before we get into talking about the film, one thing I like to do is just sort of discuss briefly the media that we watched this on. This time around, I just used the 1999 DVD release from Paramount Home Video. For the most part, an unremarkable home video release. It has the film and all the sort of basic things that you would find from a very basic film release. The kind of outstanding feature of that disc is the commentary by John Hughes, which was not ported over for the Bueller release, which came, I think, six or 7 years later for the 10th anniversary or 20th anniversary. And to my knowledge, has not found its way onto any other home video release. So kind of keep that one in the back pocket. I like my commentaries. And I did actually listen to it for this conversation as well. So for any
I'm always surprised when they have less features. Like, why would you remove a feature? You have it already.
There's so many reasons for that, Dustin. It can be licensing. It can be space on the disc. It may have been a specific request. I can't remember what year John Hughes died, but for example, the Twin Peaks first season DVD that came out, many, many years ago, it had a commentary on each episode by that episode's director. Really great commentaries from really, really interesting people like Caleb Deschanel and Mark Frost and other people who are super famous that I can't think of. But David Lynch didn't like having that sort of additional commentary there. He likes people to interpret things sort of on their own, probably only included initially because it's something that helped sell DVDs back in the early days. But when the gold edition DVDs for Twin Peaks came out, Lynch specifically requested that they keep those commentaries off, instantly making those other DVDs collector's items. So
that sounds like a Lynch thing to do.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose for some people, they kind of think, well, those things exist and they're out in the world. So if someone's super desperate, they'll go and they'll hunt that down, but it's not something that they sort of want to continue perpetuating. But that, of course, fuels the collector's market. And I'm not sure how much those DVDs would cost right now if you were going on the secondhand market to buy them. But I know I've paid a lot of money for some discs that are out of print for a specific release for specific reasons. That's just the way it is. So for any physical media buffs, that's the media it was watched on. That's the extra material that's on there, and feel free to hunt that down if that's something that you didn't know about and care about and want to get into. So this is probably my upteenth time seeing this film. Dustin, I'm assuming you've seen this film before?
You assume incorrectly, sir. It was my first viewing.
Okay. I never know. I mean, something that has this much cultural impact, you may have run across it, but you have some really interesting holes in your viewing history. Well, that's fantastic. Someone who's seen it many times and grew up with it, and somebody who's seeing it for the first time. Dustin, can you give us a quick synopsis of the film and your first impressions?
Ferris Bueller's Day Off is essentially about Ferris Bueller taking the day off of school in order to get his friend Cameron to just live a little. Cameron happens to be sick that day, so Ferris drags him out to go tooling around the town with him and his girlfriend. And it's just one of those movies that's about kids who are about to head off to college, wondering what the heck they're going to do with their life. And by the end of it, you got good old Cameron finally sticking up for himself a little bit. At least that's what it's ostensibly about. We'll see what the fan theories that I'd read up years ago have to say.
You're going to bring some of those in during the conversation?
Oh, 150%. I was thinking about them while I was watching the film.
Perfect. I was kind of counting on you to do that. And I was specifically avoiding going back and refreshing my memory of what they were so that I could be responding to them kind of fresh.
Going into the film for the first time and actually hearing you talk about how influential it was, it immediately brought up Malcolm in the Middle, because Ferris Bueller loves to talk to the camera a whole lot. And it's definitely something that Frankie Muniz did as well in Malcolm in the Middle.
And Malcolm in the Middle was preceded by Parker Lewis Can't Lose, which was pretty much a direct draw from Ferris Bueller and completely outperformed the single season failure Ferris Bueller's Day Off television series, which no one remembers.
How did that even work?
It didn't.
Some things just should not be made into TV series. Like, why are you even doing this?
Although, to be fair, the Parker Lewis Can't Lose show was actually quite a good show. It kept the Ferris Bueller vibe, and it ran for 3 or 4 seasons. So,
and honestly, just hearing the title of it, it really feels Ferris Bueller-y, because Ferris Bueller can't lose. Everything he does, people adore the crap out of him. One thing that I found rather amusing as a running joke was how anytime you hear anyone else learning of Ferris Bueller, they'd all send their well wishes. They had like save Ferris Bueller up on a water tank. They were trying to raise money to get a kidney donated for him because they thought he was dying. The police sergeant was like, oh, and could you tell him that the whole precinct is sort of rooting for him? It's just, it comes in every now and then. And I loved that. I definitely appreciated that a whole heck of a lot more than other things which seemed a little bit odd. Namely, the one thing that really took me out of the whole experience was the big musical number on the float. Because,
Really?
oh yeah, anything else could be explained away, but whenever you suddenly have a big choreographed music number with a bunch of random people, it always takes me out because it's like that suspension of disbelief is gone. The fact that everybody in the town knows and loves Ferris Bueller, I can get behind, but him suddenly lip syncing a Beatles song and groups of people doing choreographed dancing on side streets, all of a sudden, no, I can't buy it.
That's really interesting to hear because that was the least favorite part of the film for me as a first-time viewer and kind of growing up with it. But watching it this time, I genuinely enjoyed it and embraced it. And I kind of had a big smile for what it represented and kind of how it was the culmination of a lot of sort of different things. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that in comparison to how I felt.
It did, however, fit really well with the major fan theory that I'm aware of, that I was thinking of the whole time, and that's that this whole movie is Cameron's fever dream. And it's the one thing that, as far as I'm concerned, really clinches that notion for me. Up until then, I mean, people are acknowledging Ferris Bueller. Everyone's acknowledging Ferris Bueller. Nobody even knows about Cameron. He might as well be the person who doesn't exist. It's Ferris Bueller who has the girlfriend, not Cameron. But that scene there sort of shows how Ferris Bueller's sort of this power fantasy of Cameron, who is unable to do anything. He's not able to drive or even look at his dad's car. He's not able to go out. He's not able to affect anything in his home or in his life. And that stress is making him so messed up inside that he's sick. And that's why he's sick on this day. And Ferris Bueller somehow knows about that and in enough time to set up his own being sick in order to get Cameron out and about. Now, you could say that Cameron's been sick for several days and he set that up because of that, but there's definitely no indication of that. So I could easily see this fourth wall breaking person whom everyone completely loves and who can set up absolutely everything with zero consequence because he always wins. That is just being Cameron's power fantasy. Ferris Bueller has everything that he wants and is everything that he wants to be.
I do find that fan theory interesting, but I also have never subscribed to it. I think it's established fairly early on that the film takes place in a slightly off of center kind of reality where Ferris can break the fourth wall, where there's a bit of a surrealist nature to things. It's a heightened reality, and the film sets up a sort of narrative tone. And I don't believe that Ferris is a figment of Cameron's imagination and that this is all a fever dream. That's my take on it. I do know that that's not, or that's how John Hughes saw it. I think that's how the cast saw it. It's definitely something that's kind of just an interesting interpretation that has popped up over the last 30 years.
It's not something that I certainly buy into by any stretch, but I do like having those fan theories out and about because, as far as I'm concerned, it adds a level of interest to the film, that there are levels that you can watch it on, that it has at least that little bit of complexity to it, even if it is such a simple film otherwise.
It is a hallmark of a lot of good art where, regardless of what the artist intended, there's so many different readings that you can bring to it personally or just kind of intellectually and riff on it. Basically, it means that it's provocative and it's interesting, and it's either generic but relatable enough that you can bounce off of it and come up with just about anything, or it's complicated and layered enough that there's just a lot of stuff working in there that you can pull out. So,
or it just has enough fans that it's just going to happen, law of averages.
Because people got to make content. The internet needs content.
Internet needs content and people get bored and want to be special.
10 reasons why Ferris Bueller is more interesting than you remember it being. 10 fan theories. Listicles.
That's exactly the place I found it, in a bunch of listicles.
Right?
I love my listicles.
Right? This is what Cracked was built on.
I haven't gone to that site in a long time. I guess I got over my crack addiction.
Well, they had like an internal shakeup where most of their people left and created their own channels, did they not?
They got rid of the entire video division, which was a big shakeup for sure.
Yeah.
They were bought out by somebody, and yeah, everything got real messed up around that time. But long story short, that's irrelevant.
I know that high school movies are often not your favorite genre. And when I picked this movie, I was kind of hoping that it's sort of metatextual slant and its cultural impact and how well known the film is was something that would be, curious or interesting to you. And also it has some of the hallmarks of a typical kind of high school movie, but it's also in a way not specifically a high school movie. So I was really curious how you engaged with that and how that resonated with you.
I mean, you could even think of it as being pretty much on the same level as Clerks, people transitioning from high school to college, right? I think of it more as a transitional sort of film, since it's the very last vestiges of it, and its concern is more so what's happening after high school. What are people doing then, as opposed to what's going on within high school? That would be the differentiation that I would make.
I think Kevin Smith may have even said that you wouldn't have had Clerks without Ferris Bueller.
The main thing that I usually find difficult about films like this is that it's a comedy. And how does comedy live up? It's so very time and place. And there's definitely some humor in there that I appreciated. Like, as I mentioned, the everybody wishing Ferris Bueller well. And apparently some people sending him a hookergram. Like, I kind of want to know where the heck that was going. Was it just a dirty limerick telegram, or was she actually supposed to have sex with him?
That really was like the ultimate escalation.
Which is completely out of the blue.
It is the whole point of that comedy runner that goes through the whole film. As it starts with students just being like, oh wow, I hope he's okay, and then it's literally he's in the newspaper, the police station, all of them know about it. Like everybody's, when Jennifer Grey is on the phone and she's telling him that there's an intruder in the house, and she gives the name, and she's like, I appreciate that you hope my brother gets better. But I'm in danger.
And the thing that kind of confuses me is that, all right, she's saying the danger's at her house. Wouldn't you want to send a few people in order to protect Ferris, at least, even if not her? Come on, guys.
That's a good point. I never thought of that.
All I'm saying is not very good police over there. Even if they are so engaged with the community that they know teenagers by name.
I think that escalation of that runner is also part of what feeds the heightened reality of the whole thing. So at any time where you're kind of maybe wondering what's going on in the movie, like if something is maybe a little too grounded and you're like, this is starting to get a little unrealistic, and then it jumps to something where it's kind of a reminder where this is not supposed to be realistic. This is a film where the main character actually has an ongoing dialogue with the audience, and the audience is actually a part of the film. So
got all these Rube Goldberg devices to try and hide his being sick, or is trying to fake his being sick rather. But one thing I noticed that went in opposition with that is Cameron. He starts off as being incredibly sick, and he seems to get healthier as the movie goes on. And you could either interpret that as his mental state getting better, or you could say that as his fever dream gets more and more diluted and the reality gets more and more heightened, he sees himself as being healthier and healthier because he's no longer as connected to reality.
I mean, he definitely is, no matter how you read it. John Hughes said that the way that Cameron's life is, he apparently fakes being sick a lot. And when he's faking being sick, he has to put on an act and people have to buy it. And there's a lot of pressure that goes with that. And the reason why he fakes being sick is because he's so kind of beaten down by the shittiness of his family that he just doesn't really have a lot of filters or good boundaries or the ability to kind of deal with a lot of, school, just regular life kind of stuff. So when he's actually genuinely sick, he can relax. because he actually doesn't have to pretend his body is just rebelling against him. So he just rolls with it. And I think in the beginning of the film, he's definitely kind of wallowing in his misery. But I mean, I've had those sick days where I've had to force myself out of bed just to like run a couple of errands or whatever. And, just getting some sunshine and some fresh air makes me feel better.
I always feel worst first thing in the morning, and I'll question, do I feel sick enough to not go in? Because I know I'm going to feel better in about 4 hours, not completely better, but better enough that it would be unnoticeable.
That's true.
Who are these people who wake up refreshed, more refreshed than when they went to bed? I hate them all. I'm very jealous. Don't write in. I don't need to hear about it.
So I do think that Cameron's brightening up, for lack of a better word, could be any number of things that aren't just based in, this is what the plot required. He is relaxing. He is letting go. You do feel a little bit better, later in the day than you would first thing in the morning. He is genuinely kind of enjoying the day.
Even if he doesn't admit it for a good long while.
Another thing that Hughes said was that because he has such a lack of any kind of parental figures in his life, Ferris, as well as being his best friend, he looks to Ferris to be kind of a father figure as well. Like that's why he lets Ferris talk him into things. That's why he lets Ferris essentially be the leader. He does say near the end, it is possible to say no to Ferris Bueller, which of course, I love Matthew Broderick's kind of how taken aback he is by that comment. But Cameron is willingly relinquishing control. There's a lot of criticism online where people talk about how Ferris is a bad friend because he's forcing Cameron to do all of these things. Cameron, I think
he's theoretically doing it for good reason, to try and get Cameron out of his shell, which he finally does at the very end when Cameron goes to smash the car and actually says no to Ferris.
I do think that Cameron is letting him do that. Like, if you've ever experienced being frozen by choices, for whatever reason, either just a multitude of options or trying to please somebody else or, as a trauma response or whatever. But
like the song says, 1,000 towers rise before me. I cannot climb them all.
And I think because Ferris doesn't have those boundaries, because Ferris operates on a different level, and, he hasn't had setbacks. He has an ability to navigate through the world in a way that a lot of other people don't. He's Cameron's excuse. Cameron doesn't have to make the choice. He can let Ferris make the choice and he'll follow Ferris. I do think he'll put his foot down if it was really compromising him, if he wasn't doing something that he didn't genuinely wish he could do of his own free volition. The cast actually, they were talking amongst themselves during the production where I think it was actually Alan Ruck and Mia Sara. They said that the three of them sort of represent the id, the ego, and the super ego. And Ferris is very much the id, I would assume, because Sloane is sort of the most grounded, the one with kind of the most normal engagement with the world and family life. She's the ego, and Cameron would be the super ego because he worries about everything. I think that's an interesting way to kind of look at the film as well, because those three have all been friends for so long. I think Cameron says you've been saying that since 5th grade. Like, they've been friends since they were fairly young, and they're very, very close, like all three of them, and they're very familiar with each other. So, yeah. Hughes does say he doesn't think that Ferris is a good person. He says that he does operate from I'm paraphrasing here, but he does operate from a very sort of selfish, entitled position where he comes up with a plan. There's things that he wants to do, and he just sort of does them.
Well, if you have everyone on your side at all times, you can do no wrong. Like, worst case scenario, your sister gets upset with you for a bit, but then abruptly changes her mind. I understand that Charlie Sheen's drug dealer character had a good conversation with her in the police station, but she went home, had that race with him, and then lets him sneak in the back all of a sudden. That seemed very abrupt, that change, where it was like, okay, I'm going to catch you. We're going to get you once and for all, to, nope, I'm helping you out now, all of a sudden.
I think that moment was, if someone's going to bust Ferris, it's going to be her. Also, I think that conversation did, awaken something inside of her where the conversation with Charlie Sheen's character, who I think his name was Garth or something like that, which
He's
of course
credited as police station boy.
Yeah, there's actually like this weird subplot where his family, like his dad owns the towing company that tows Mr. Rooney's car And there was more to that, like in the script, so that when he shows up at the end of the film, like everything's kind of weirdly interconnected, but it ended up getting dropped for time or money or something. But
Actually, the more interconnected it would have been, the more likely I'd think it was a fever dream, because once again,
yeah,
that
right.
it becomes too much.
But I think there is something to what he was saying about, like, why does it matter to you that he gets away with things? And that's kind of more on you. And I think I'm pretty confident that Jeannie is probably going to skip some school after this. And I think that was her exerting some agency where she's like, I have the power to bust you here, but I'm choosing not to do it because I'm in control.
But that was after she went on a car chase with the police and got herself a big old ticket.
It was. And I think that
So, like,
was,
what's the real benefit to that other than to trick us, the audience?
again, I would argue that her conversation with Charlie Sheen awoke things within her, but they
It
do
didn't
have that.
solidify until it was convenient to the plot.
She does have that eye lock with Ferris on the road when, like, she almost runs him over or whatever. And I think in that moment she was swept up by, this is it, I can actually nail him. And then when she actually does get into a position where she can nail him because she does race home, he didn't beat her, she beat him. She had the power in that moment and she chose to let him go. And that's why I think she had the agency. I don't think it was just this like huge switch, this change of character or motivation. I think if he beat her home and the parents got there and were like, oh, see, Ferris has been here all along and he's still sick and whatever, she would be angry. I think the fact that she got there first and that was a choice is everything to that moment.
And I think that's far too much having to defend theoretical motivations when it really can seem just like it was to make another tense moment so that he could go running around through backyards and have a bit of a action scene to finish off the film.
It definitely was working in a bit of a chase just to kind of like pick up the energy after like the really serious stuff that happened with Cameron and Cameron's dad's Ferrari.
The last time we see Cameron, by the way.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. But Hughes himself does say, if anyone's going to bust her brother, it's going to be her. And that's a big part of her choice with Mr. Rooney at the end there. Plus, she's kind of got Mr. Rooney by the balls because he broke into the house and she's got the wallet. And so I think what he's basically saying, I mean, she's a fairly insecure character. The fact that she's not even comfortable with her name, she's created like this other name, this other identity. My name is Jean, but my friends call me Shauna, all that sort of stuff. Like she's struggling with her identity. And my interpretation of the end, which is also rooted in things that John Hughes himself has said, is
you got to say it in the film. You can't say it in the commentary.
Well, see, the film is also a very, very light kind of film, and a lot of things go unsaid, and it has subtext, but it's not trying to beat you over the head in the same way that, The Breakfast Club or Pretty in Pink or even Weird Science. I mean, Weird Science is goofy and light, but I think it has a more serious undertone than this one does. I think he's definitely trying to lean more into the comedy and the pixie-ish chaotic fun of Ferris. But I think everything that John Hughes does has to have some element that's rooted in some genuine emotion or tragedy or, something. So
the tragedy in this one definitely being the fact that Cameron's going to be killed and we never see him again.
that was kind of a weird thing for me. I mean, you kind of assume or you hope that the dad is going to come home, that there's going to be fireworks, but Cameron's going to stand up for himself, which he's never done before, and that they may have a breakthrough. But it's also just as possible that his dad's going to like literally beat the shit out of him.
I'd say the best case scenario really is that they have it out, then Cameron goes to college and he never looks back. As long as he's able to, support himself during college, because you'd figure mommy and daddy were the ones who'd do so initially. He might pull that in order to have more control over Cameron.
I think the worst case scenario is something like really violent or ugly happens. And I think best case scenario is they manage to hash it out and the dad, maybe realizes my priorities are not good. But I think the actual reality of it is probably something closer to what you just said, where probably, as soon as you graduate high school, like get out. And then Cameron's going to have to go get a job and he's going to have to pay his own way through school. I kind of wonder because he wears that shirt with the symbol on it, which I can't remember the name for. It's the medical symbol with the snakes on the staff.
Caduceus staff, I'll say.
Could be. And I wonder if he wears that because, I mean, he says he doesn't know what he wants to do as far as college is concerned. I wondered if that was broadcasting that like maybe medical school is kind of in his future. That's what his parents have planned for him. Or maybe his dad is a doctor and he's
going to breed snakes.
Or maybe very possible. I feel like we've had this conversation before on another episode and I don't know.
Well, if we were talking about Ferris Bueller's Day Off, we were having the wrong conversation that day, I feel.
Well, no, but I think the idea of the symbol came up because I feel like I've said the same thing and you made the same joke.
Are we really that old? Are we the Simpsons? Are we starting to have Bart have the same issue again over and over?
That is something that I do like about the film, though. I like that it doesn't hammer all of these things in a very sort of literal, didactic kind of way. I like that it's more of an amusement park ride that has deeper levels to it.
Which, as a general rule, will put something as a good film. And I'd say this is a good film, but the question is it a masterpiece? Is it a great film? And that's where it's so hard as a comedy. Certainly, as you said, it's so influential. You see its influence in so many other films. I've seen those films before this, so that now going back to Ferris Bueller, which I've not seen, it seems like I've seen all those plot points before. Nothing seems new. And that becomes really, really tricky in a lot of these things. Sometimes that first film, it still does it in a way that was never quite repeated. They never quite found that formula. And that is definitely a masterpiece of those genres, of those styles of film. But being a comedy, it's that double whammy of how does it live up? And there's still the parts that I like Ben Stein and just how boring all of the teachers were at school. Loved any scene with that. I was actually hoping that they'd have more.
It's actually, for me, John Hughes movies in general, they're very, very much a product of the 80s. They're very, very much a product of kind of white suburban America. And while in a lot of ways they still resonate and they're still good films, there is genuinely problematic things that do run through some of them. And, they weren't problematic as far as the cultural conversation of the time, of the mid to late 80s, but definitely are now. I was kind of worried doing this one because I haven't seen it actually since that kind of looking back at the Hughes movies and how do they hold up in this new cultural climate. So
I wouldn't say that there's any sort of major issues that are of the ilk that you're talking about. I mean, they had a couple dirty jokes in there when the sister was running upstairs calling the police and shouting at the principal. Man, I'm great with names, aren't I? How she shouts out that she's got a raging case of herpes. It took me aback for a second, like, wait, what? Oh, right, doesn't want to get raped. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. It's just I did not see that coming. It was kind of out of the blue. And then, of course, the hookergram.
There are a few things in there, though. Like, there's a lot of white people. The only
black people there are is during that dancing scene so that they could have some rhythm.
I was really happy about that parade scene. That's one of the things that I love about that parade scene because it kind of makes sense that Ferris living in his suburban life and going to his school in that time period, he probably does have a very whitewashed kind of existence. His dad is in advertising. His mom is a realtor. Obviously, they're not hard up for money. They have means. He has privilege. I think that feeds in a little bit to some things where I was kind of like, I like Ferris Bueller less in this movie than I've ever liked him before because he does seem kind of like a bit of an entitled prick.
The one thing that actually sort of left off with a little bit at the end even, because early on in the film, he proposes to Sloane and he says that, yeah, that's the woman I'm going to marry. I think later on towards the end. But at the same time, as he's running away to get home before his sister does, he makes sure to stop and introduce himself to a couple girls who are
Sunbathing.
tanning in their backyard. It's
Yeah.
like, dude, you just proposed to someone. Why do you need to try to hook up with these girls?
To be fair, John Hughes said that he doesn't think that Ferris was actually proposing to her.
I don't think
But
Sloan was thinking that either.
no, no, but it does. I thought the same thing. It's a weird off-color moment, especially after she says he's going to marry me, and they do have this like a fairly mature kind of relationship. It's not sort of the puppy love of a lot of teen movies, and that's something that Hughes himself has also sort of commented on and said that he really appreciated how Broderick and Sarah were able to sort of convey that. But to just kind of circle back to my point, he probably lives a very whitewashed existence, but when they're downtown, when they're actually in the city of Chicago, you get to see there's people of all colors, creeds, like everything. And that made sense to me, just as I was starting to kind of get a little worried about, the whiteness of the film, so to speak. There was also that line where they're really reluctant to give the car to that parking attendant, which felt very much like racially profiling. And he's like, "Do you speak English?" And he's like, "What country do you think we're in?" I think it really depends on the mood you're in kind of when you're watching the film, because it's not overtly offensive. It doesn't do things that some of Hughes's other movies trip up on a little more, like the date rape in 16 Candles, or, Ali Sheedy's makeover in Breakfast Club, which people now just kind of like cringe about. But it's still very much a product of its time. But I think this one survives the scrutiny. I don't think Weird Science would survive the scrutiny. I'm kind of afraid to go back to that one because I used to love that movie.
I could definitely see that making a sex slave could be no good.
Although to their credit, I mean, she's kind of in control the whole time. I don't know if they ever actually do have sex with her. And
They never do, but
she's kind of like grooming them to be decent human beings and, useful male people to go out into the world and actually engage with women in a real kind of way. I need to revisit it. I'm scared to.
might feel a bit awkward during the shower scene.
Yeah. So yeah, you were talking about this being a comedy and how comedies can sometimes be really weird to go back to. And
Because I always worry a bit when there's a comedy where I don't actually laugh.
I genuinely laughed several times while watching it this afternoon. So there's that. But I laughed in places where it wasn't necessarily the place that I would traditionally laugh when watching it. Like some of the jokes that I used to think were super funny weren't as funny this time around. Like the film hasn't necessarily aged well, but it hasn't aged badly. But my aging has changed my engagement with it, and I kind of enjoy it in a slightly different way. And I do recognize that nostalgia plays a lot into it, as well as I love those three actors. Like Broderick is Ferris Bueller, and like the way Ruck plays Cameron, I just love. I literally I was at work and I can't remember what was going on, but I'm like, I'll go. And I had to remember, where does that come from? And then I remembered, oh man, that's Ferris Bueller. So like that movie still is a part of me in so many ways.
I just saw it and I don't even know what the heck reference you heard making.
That was when Cameron was in his car arguing with himself. He's going to call me. He's going to call me. He's not going to leave me alone. And he's like, I'll go.
Gotcha.
Then he turns on his car and screams. A lot of rage in Cameron. And I love Mia Sara. I actually love Mia Sara in that role as well. So yeah, anyways, I kind of just took the reins of that and started riffing on the 80s-ness and the not the wokeness of the film necessarily, but how it maybe
the lack of failure of the film.
Yeah.
And as I was saying, the film didn't necessarily make me laugh out loud, but there's a number of jokes that I found rather clever. And that's sort of the metric that I have to go by a lot of the time with any comedy, really, because I'm such a dour turd that stuff that I find amusing, I don't normally laugh out loud, regardless. So people have a hard time telling whether or not I'm entertained by something. But the problem also becomes, as you said, it's very much a product of its time, which I grew up in. And does it become too diluted? by the rest of the movies and experiences that are out there? Or is it able to stand out and stand alone? And it becomes really hard to tell. Like going into this, you said that you were having a hard time figuring out where you're going to fall on it. And I was having a hard time figuring out where the heck I'm going to fall on this, whether or not it's museum or master. And it's still a bit in the air.
It is for me too. I've kind of decided where I'm going to land, but I'm not 100%.
You're never going to be 100% happy with it?
No, I don't think so.
Well, if we're lucky, we'll land on opposite sides of the coin so that it all sort of works out as just being a who knows kind of deal.
Just before we give our votes, I do want to point out that, I said that there were times where I thought that Ferris was kind of an incorrigible prick because he doesn't like the boundaries, and any obstacle you put in front of him, he's going to say, well, I mean, he says in the restaurant at Chez Louis, he says, first off, there's no such thing as going too far. There's no line. He's always
very bad line.
He's always going to push to get what he wants. And I do think it's worth noting that, like, Ferris isn't just being an asshole. It's a very sort of anti-authoritarian kind of thing. I think part of why he's so well liked is because he's willing. He's got that Bugs Bunny, Groucho Marx, stick it to the man kind of attitude. And, especially in the 80s, especially as teens, having that representative, having somebody who was willing to be the avatar of anti-authoritarianism, I think that's why he resonated so strongly with so many people. And I think that's why it works so well to have him be represented in the whole id, ego, and super ego thing as the id, and why those other two characters in the friendship are so important. But I do think it's important to not just think of, he's not just an agent of chaos. It's fighting against like shitty authoritarians.
It's not just shitty authoritarians. I mean, the guy at the restaurant, which is a super fancy restaurant, didn't believe this kid was telling the truth, and he wasn't. It's like, dude, you're a teenager. You're not this rich person. Kindly leave, because I'm not going to have you dine and dash on me. It's perfectly legitimate.
True, but I mean, he represents that snooty maitre d', right? I mean, there's definitely, we could talk for another half an hour about the class stuff, because I mean, he comes from that class. Like, his dad is in that restaurant, but he's kind of pushing back against that.
And initially I was going in looking at the principal thinking, oh, here's just somebody who's trying to get this kid who's a truant, which is an actual crime in the States. So like they have truancy officers, like that boggles my mind a little bit. But he went way too far on it. I was thinking that I might side a little bit with the principal, but no, he was a crazy authoritarian.
He does definitely cross a line. Yeah.
He crosses more than one line.
And I think it's fair to say that Rooney is kind of a small man. I like how Hughes describes him, where he says that, his empire is the school. He governs the student body, and he only really has any kind of power and knows how to exert power over children. If you take him out of there, he doesn't know how to talk to grownups. He doesn't know how to engage with people in the real world, because he is a fairly kind of small person. And he even says, like, I didn't achieve this station in life without whatever. And it's like, he's a principal of a elementary school, like
of a high school. Come on now. And it's,
oh, that is a high school. That's right. But he's kind of a big fish in a small pond, and he kind of gets his,
he definitely has little
that.
man syndrome for sure.
Yeah, there is that one line. You brought up the maitre d' and how badly they treated him, and it reminded me of that line where he says, "It's things that allow people like us to tolerate people like you," and that was just such a shitty. It's kind of a really dickish thing to say on a few levels. He's also pretending to be somebody in a class that he's not. He's pretending to be the shitty authoritarian to get what he wants. That whole restaurant scene is a kind of complicated scene for me as far as Ferris's character goes.
You kind of wonder, what is there a line for him? He says there's no line that's too far. There's no such thing as going too far. Right now, these are just high school hijinks, even if they're as crazy as they are. What if it gets to life and death stuff?
But he is also motivated. He is a very anti-authoritarian person, but he's also doing it like this day was planned for Cameron. You find out later that the whole point was to give Cameron these experiences. So when he's getting turned away from one of the places that he wants to be, I can understand that he's going to like do whatever it takes to continue the plan and get what he wants.
But the notion of, I don't like any authority that's trying to hold me down, but I will protect mine as much as humanly possible, can very easily apply to, the Ku Klux Klan. We're going to protect our own, and we don't care what the government says.
Again, John Hughes says Ferris is not a good person.
There you go. I'm just saying that it always amuses me how things that can be used to justify some actions or things that we'll consider good, once you apply them to generally negative people or groups, it doesn't quite work. Like I every now and then I imagine a motivational speaker. And could you imagine someone saying, don't let anyone ever tell you that you're wrong. You got to work for your dreams. You got to go hard, and you can't let anyone stop you or slow you down, sort of thing. Like it's nice if he's talking to somebody who's down and out and just feeling a little low. But what if that person was talking to Hitler, Hitler's like, man, maybe I should just go to art college, not deal with all this stuff. And he's like, no, man, you have a dream of a pure Germany. Go and fight for that dream. You have to do it.
A dream of reclaiming the Sudetenland.
Exactly.
Yeah, I imagine being on
Context.
being on the wrong side of Ferris. Like, he's very charming, he's very pleasant. He's probably incredibly fun to be around. Obviously, the way he can navigate through the world, there's probably a lot of fun to be had with him. But if you're on the other side of Ferris, I don't think there's like a morally good and bad for him. I think it's just what's in my way from getting what I want.
I could see him as quite the kingpin or a drug dealer.
I'm really curious to
criminal leader.
I'm really curious to see Election now, because a lot of people have said that Election is kind of like an unofficial headcanon sequel to Ferris Bueller.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. I do have a test today. That wasn't bullshit. It's on European socialism. I mean, really, what's the point? I'm not European. I don't plan on being European. So who gives a crap if they're socialists? They could be fascist anarchists. It still wouldn't change the fact that I don't own a car. I recall Central Park in fall. How you tore your dress. What a mess, I confess. It's not that I condone fascism. Or any ism, for that matter. Isms, in my opinion, are not good. A person should not believe in an ism. He should believe in himself. I quote John Lennon, I don't believe in Beatles, I just believe in me. A good point there. After all, he was the walrus. I could be the walrus. I'd still have to bum rides off of people.
All right, so Dustin, where do you fall on Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Masterpiece or museum piece?
I think the side of the fence that I've tipped over is towards museum piece. As I said, it is so hard to put comedies as masterpieces, just as a general rule for me. It's so very time and place, so very culturally motivated. Even if the plot itself is universal, the means by which you deliver that is so very specific and specialized. And it's really hard to ever really think of them as masterpieces, as something that I could go back to over and over again and want to watch and want to show others. Even my favorite comedies, I think it would be kind of hard to fall on the side of masterpiece. And that is one of the things that's keeping Ferris Bueller's Day off the list for me. I kind of want to go back and check out any other comedies we've done and see if any of them have made it.
I've voted for some comedies to be masterpieces, but I don't know if you have, unless you count Troll 2.
I count Troll 2 as a so bad it's good film. It's an unintentional comedy. It's something completely different.
Well, as you stated, I have also been struggling. The reason I picked this movie, it's kind of funny, actually. The reason I picked this movie, the last few movies we've done have been not domestic films or foreign films. They've been fairly heavy. I was like, I just kind of want something light and basic. And I knew I had some nostalgic love for. In a weird way, this kind of swung the pendulum like way to the other side, because it's so specific and American and Western and white. But I do still think the comedy is great. I love the talking to the camera. I love so many things about this film. But watching it this time, I don't know. I think the movie's better in my memory than it is in actual execution. I mean, we didn't talk about any of the technical stuff. There's some interesting things in the score, the music being chosen. There's some interesting editing. I was like, man, I probably have never seen editing like this, or I had probably never seen editing like this back in 1986 when I would have seen the movie. But it just, I don't know. I just can't go full masterpiece on this one as much as I kind of want to. So my controversial take is I'm going to go museum piece for Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and probably mull about that for the rest of the run of the podcast.
You'll live to regret it, sir.
One day, we'll do a show where we'll kind of like pick a couple movies that where we don't know if we really love the vote that we gave them, and we'll kind of do a reappraisal. And Ferris might be one of those for me, but museum piece for me as well. It's a classic. Its cultural footprint is huge.
It's still, not a bad movie.
It's still very enjoyable. I just don't think it's that timeless thing.
It doesn't have that je ne sais quoi.
That belongs in a museum.
Which leads us to our next question. In October, we'll be moving on to the Halloween Spooktacular. And I did just have 2 films in a row. So what is Mike's second film in a row to lead us into that?
Oh, damn. I haven't chosen. Dang it. I remember we kind of talked about this briefly. I don't think I took you seriously when you're like, yeah, you can pick both movies.
You better pick a second movie. The threat that I'm going to make right now is that if you don't, I'm going to choose a Serbian film, and then no one will be happy.
I was kind of curious about doing Danger Diabolik, which is a Mario Bava Italian superhero pastiche thing. I'm not going to put that in stone, but
we're going to put it in clay.
So I'm going to say Danger Diabolik for now, unless something hits me where I'm like, oh my God, I want to talk about this movie so bad. And that sort of takes its place.
And then hopefully after the Spooktacular, we will have a brand new list to work with. I am excited. Oh,
that's right. Because November. Interesting. All right, so that's 2 votes for museum piece from Dustin and I. We'd love to know what you all think. Comment on any of our social media or on the YouTube channel, comment threads, Facebook, all that sort of stuff. You can find us either on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. We're For Your Consideration or FYC Show. Like, share, follow, and subscribe to any of those channels or platforms if you don't already.
Rate and review if you're feeling generous.
It helps with the algorithms, gets the show into the eyes and ears of people who may enjoy the content but are not aware of it. Super thrilled that we actually got this much conversation out of a comedy. We don't always get this much conversation out of a comedy. And there's definitely stuff we could have covered that we haven't covered.
Conversation never ends. There's always more to talk about.
Always more. So happy to continue that, online with anybody who's happy to engage. So thanks so much for joining us, for downloading, for giving us your time and ear space, brain space. Hope everybody is staying healthy, doing well, and we'll see you next time on the podcast. I've been your host, Mike Josic.
And I've been your other host, Dustin Friesenau. Take care for now. Peace.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.